This book is called Uncle Jed's Barbershop, and it is written by Margaree King Mitchell and illustrated by James Ransom. Some beautiful pictures in this book, beautiful illustrations. Now, this book is about a young girl who tells about her great uncle, her Uncle Jed, and his dream of owning a barber shop, having his own business. And so he works very hard and saves up a lot of money and goes through some difficult times before he is able to have his own business. And he's very old before he's able to have his own business. So this story takes place around 1930. So that's about 90 years ago, a long time ago. And during that time, there was segregation, which means that there were different opportunities for black people and white people. That white people often had privileges and opportunities that black people and people of color did not have. There sometimes were laws about that, and there sometimes were just different expectations from the people. And we sometimes call those Jim Crow laws, where black people were prevented from having the same opportunities. So very unfair, very unjust time. There also, in 1930, there was a bank crash. There was a bank depression, and a lot of banks closed, and people couldn't get their money back. They lost the money that they had in banks. That can't happen now. After that, there were some laws that were made so that banks had to guarantee that people could get their money back. If there was a problem when people had money in the banks, they were entitled to get it back. They still owned it. But in 1930, that wasn't the case, and a lot of people lost their money when there was the crash and the Great Depression. So that's some background for this story as we talk about this, what goes on in our story. So let's read this, Uncle Jed's Barbershop. And I'll show you the pictures as we go. They're so pretty. Jedediah Johnson was my granddaddy's brother. Everybody has their favorite relative. Well, Uncle Jedediah was mine. He used to come by our house every Wednesday night with his clippers. He was the only black barber in the county. Daddy said that before Uncle Jed started cutting hair, he and Granddaddy used to have to go 30 miles to get a haircut. But here's a picture of Uncle Jedediah coming to the house and picking up the little girl who's telling our story. And see, he comes with a horse. Doesn't have a car. Rides a horse to come in and cut their hair. After Uncle Jed cut my daddy's hair, he lathered a short brush with soap and spread it on my daddy's face and shaved him. Then he started over on my granddaddy. I always asked Uncle Jed to cut my hair, but Mama wouldn't let him. So he would run the clippers on the back of my neck and just pretend to cut my hair. He even spread lotion on my neck. I would smell wonderful all day. Look at him pretending to cut her hair. See how happy she looks? She loves Uncle Jed. Oops. My cat. When he was done, he would pick me up and sit me in his lap and tell me about the barber shop he was going to open one day. and about all the fancy equipment that would be in it. The sinks would be so shiny they sparkled. The floors so clean you could see yourself. He was going to have 4 barber chairs, and outside was going to be a big, tall, red and white barber pole. He told me he was saving up for it. And look at him telling his stories about it. He had big dreams, didn't he? He had been saying the same thing for years. Nobody believed him. People didn't have dreams like that in those days. We lived in the South, the southern United States. Most people were poor. My daddy owned a few acres of land, and so did a few others, but most people were sharecroppers. That meant they lived in a shack and worked somebody else's land in exchange for a share of the crop. Aren't these pictures pretty? When I was 5 years old, I got sick. That particular morning, I didn't come into the kitchen while Mama was fixing breakfast. Mama and Daddy couldn't wake me up. My nightgown and the bedclothes were all wet where I had sweated. She was very, very sick. Mama wrapped me in a blanket while Daddy went outside and hitched the horse to the wagon. We had to travel about 20 miles into town to the hospital. It was midday when we got there, so it took hours to go. We had to go to the colored waiting room. In those days, they kept blacks and whites separate. There were separate public restrooms, separate water fountains, separate schools. It was called segregation. So in the hospital, we had to go to the colored waiting room, a room where only black people or people of color went, as if they weren't as good and didn't deserve the same quality treatment as the white people. So very wrong. Even though I was unconscious, the doctors wouldn't look at me until they had finished with all the white patients. When the doctors did examine me, they told my daddy that I needed an operation and that it would cost $300. $300 was a lot of money in those days. My daddy didn't have that kind of money, and the doctors wouldn't do the operation until they had the money. My mama bundled me back up in the blanket, and they took me home. Mama held me in her arms all night. She kept me alive until Daddy found Uncle Jed. He found him early the next morning in the next county on his way to cut somebody's hair. Daddy told him about me. Uncle Jed leaned on his bent cane and stared straight ahead. He told Daddy that the money didn't matter. He wouldn't let anything happen to his Sarah Jean. So Uncle Jed is the only person they knew who had money saved up and who would have $300. I had the operation. For a long time after that, Uncle Jed came by the house every day to see how I was doing. I know that $300 delayed him from opening the barbershop. Uncle Jed came awfully close to opening his shop a few years after my operation. He had saved enough money to buy the land and build the building, but he still needed money for the equipment. So he was saving up, and he was getting ready He bought the land, he built the building, but he couldn't open up the barbershop until he had the equipment. So he's still working on saving money. Anyway, Uncle Jed had come by the house. He had just finished supper when there was a knock on the door. It was Mr. Ernest Walters, a friend of Uncle Jed's. He had come by to tell Uncle Jed about the bank failing. That was where Mr. Walters and Uncle Jed had their money. Uncle Jed had over $3,000 in the bank, and it was gone. Uncle Jed just stood there a long time before he said anything. Then he told Mr. Walters that even though he was disappointed, he would just have to start all over again. He wasn't going to give up on his dream. Talk about some hard times. That was the beginning of the Great Depression. Nobody had much money. But Uncle Jed kept going around to his customers, cutting their hair, even though they couldn't pay him. His customers shared with him whatever they had: a hot meal, fresh eggs, vegetables from the garden. And when they were able to pay again, they did. And Uncle Jed started saving all over again. See, he's got a bag of vegetables here that they've given him from their garden because they didn't have any money. So he cut their hair and they gave him what they had. Old Uncle Jed finally got his barbershop. He opened it on his 79th birthday. It had everything, just like he said it would. Big, comfortable chairs, 4 cutting stations, you name it. The floors were so clean they sparkled. On opening day, people came from all over the county. They were old Uncle Jed's customers. He had walked to see them for so many years. That day, they all came to him. See the reflections of the people in the mirror? How many people were in the room? Uncle Jed's pretty happy. I believe he cut hair all night and all the next day and the next night and the day after that. He was so busy. That man was so glad to have that shop, he didn't need any sleep. Of course, I was there too. I wouldn't have missed it for the world. When I sat in one of the big barber chairs, Uncle Jed patted the back of my neck with lotion like he always did. Then he twirled me around and around in the barber chair. And look, the little girl that she was is now all grown up. Still telling the story about her Uncle Jed that she loved so much. Uncle Jed died not long after that, and I think he died a happy man. You see, he made his dream come true, even when nobody else believed in it. He taught me to dream too. They were cleaning up his barbershop, sweeping his floor. He taught me to dream too. Uncle Jed's barbershop. And we all want to keep dreaming. We want to hold on to those things that are important to us and work for the things that matter, and always try to fight for things that are good and that are best for people and that are just and right and equal.